with me if you want to live. You just don't turn it off!
What's going on, everyone? My name is Jason. You're watching Backtrack Cinema. In today's video, we're going to be ranking my personal top 10 favorite Chuck Norris movies of all time. I went on a huge Chuck Norris binge. I tried to watch as many as I could. So as some of your favorite Chuck Norris movies are not on this list, it's probably because I just haven't watched them, or I just didn't think they were as good as yours, and that's all right. But you got to let me know what your favorite Chuck Norris movies are in the comments below. Like and subscribe, all that jazz, and we're going to have a good time talking some Chuck Norris. He's one of my favorite action stars from the 80s. I'm a big fan of Chuck Norris. However may you feel about him, he's an icon in pop culture, and he's definitely one of the most iconic action stars of all time. So without further ado, let's get into it. Coming at number 10 is Hero and the Terror.
Street man will show you what it's like.
Oh, good.
This movie has always really worked for me. I always liked it as a kid. It was one of my favorites as a kid, actually. I watched Hero and the Terror a lot, probably because of the horror fan in me. If you go back to other Chuck Norris films like Silent Rage, I feel like he was trying this again. But I feel like you get a more vulnerable Chuck Norris in this movie. You see a scared Chuck Norris, because at the beginning of this film, he captured this serial killer called the Terror, and he's the hero. And, you know, it terrified him. You see him having these nightmares, dealing with PTSD. So that's what I mean when you get a more vulnerable Chuck Norris in this. You also get some martial arts in there. You get some fight scenes. It's not as action-packed as you may think. They were going for more mood. They were going for more suspense. I really like the killer here, Simon Moon, played by Jack Halloran, I believe. Really big dude. Really intimidating presence. He's this killer who kills women and then hides them, and Chuck Norris once again has to stop him. One of the problems with the movie is that it has conflicting tones. It's going for a more serious approach. It feels like it's trying to play everything serious, and then you get moments in it where it's really got that 80s music, like where he's working out and everything. There's like a little montage, like he's trying to, because he's having these nightmares, he's trying to work the nightmare out. It's Chuck Norris hitting the weight room and all that kind of stuff. You get a side character of Steve James, which is always nice. You know what I mean? But it's kind of, the tone is conflicted. It's like it doesn't have this consistent tone. Always liked Hero and the Terror, though. Coming at number 9 is the Delta Force. Well, for all intents and purposes, this was a first-time watch for me. I did enjoy the Delta Force once it got past a certain point in the movie. Like, the whole third act is action-packed, over-the-top, cheesy kind of stuff. But it is awesome. It's triumphant. You get to see Chuck Norris do his thing. Lots of explosions, lots of action. You know, you get some fight scenes in there. You get Chuck Norris in his peak, where he was the most popular, I believe. Like, this is 1986. But this was a fun time. It's just that first half of the movie, I feel like it's going for suspense, everything, but I didn't feel like it was very suspenseful the first half of the movie. But that's why it really sits here. It, you know, probably should be higher, but the second half of the movie is really awesome. And you get Lee Marvin in here. I think Lee Marvin and Chuck Norris were a pretty good pairing in this film. But I think the real star was the music. I thought the music was absolutely awesome. Really enjoyed the soundtrack for this one. Coming at number 8 is Invasion USA. Now, when I reviewed this movie last year, I think I was a little hard on it. Sometimes I can be like that. We're not watching Chuck Norris for his acting. We're not necessarily watching it for its story. But as a movie reviewer, I just, you know, I see things like sometimes I got to pick them apart, right? But don't get me wrong. I enjoyed this one when I first watched it. It was another first-time watch last year. I rewatched it with more of a fan's point of view, just enjoying an action movie, and it works on that level. It is a great action film. It has some great action sequences in it. It has a pretty good bad guy. What's really funny about this movie to me is all the bloody one-liners. The one-liners are absolutely fantastic. They're great. You'll laugh and get a real good kick out of them.
You lose this?
It'll be time to die.
You're beginning to irritate me.
See you in hell.
Send me a postcard.
It's kind of odd. Like, the villain's usually not scared of no one, you know what I mean? But he's so terrified of Matt Hunter, played by Chuck Norris here. And, you know, when he goes, it's time to die. Like, the bad guy is having nightmares of Chuck Norris. But It's a good time. There's a really useless journalist in here, the girl here, who's absolutely useless in this movie, but the action scenes deliver with quite a punch. It's clearly not perfect. It's not a perfect movie by any means, but you take it as what it is. This movie really encapsulates what 80s action was. If you were to put a movie on and said, what were 80s action movies like as a whole? Put Invasion USA on. Over-the-top action, people dodging bullets, people never getting hurt, really tough male masculinity, one-liners coming out of your wazoo. Just, it's an 80s action film, and it really represents that really well. Coming at number 7 is Code of Silence. I really do like this one. I think we're stepping out of Chuck Norris's comfort zone here. We're sinking our teeth into a better story than most of his films. It has the action, it has the martial arts, it has the car chases, everything you'd want in a Chuck Norris movie. Some great fight scenes. There's a really great fight scene in a bar, which was really realistic because you see Chuck Norris get his ass kicked. You know what I mean? When he goes into a bar, he gets surrounded by Colombian mafia, I think it is. He tries desperately to fight them off. He's trying and gets his ass kicked. It's because no one on the police force will help him, because there's a really underlining storyline here, which I think that should have been the main storyline. It's kind of like the secondary storyline, and it's where this one of his people on his force, one of his cops, ends up killing this unarmed teenage boy in this bust they were doing. The guy's been on the force too long. He's older, and he plants a gun on this kid to cover his ass. And Eddie Cusack, which is Chuck Norris's character, is like, no, I want him off my team. I don't want to work with him. And he won't stand up for him at his trial. No one tells the truth, and Eddie Cusack does. He says, I think he's dangerous to put out on the street. And this kind of, the whole police force boycotts Eddie Cusack. Then it's Chuck Norris taking on a whole mafia Chicago crime lord by himself, and it turns into a one-man army. It's a better story than most of his movies, but still delivers on everything you want on a Chuck Norris movie. Coming at number 6 is the original Missing in Action. Believe it or not, this was actually a first-time watch. I always grew up with Missing in Action 3. I don't know why, I just never got around to it, but I did like this one. I thought this seemed like a very personal story to Chuck Norris. You can tell he was into this movie, and turns out that I did some reading, and he actually had a younger brother killed in Vietnam who was a soldier and all that kind of stuff, and this is kind of like homage to him. The whole franchise, Missing in Action 1, 2, 3, is a big tribute to his brother, and you can tell Chuck Norris is into these movies. But this first movie, they actually filmed number 1 and 2 at the same time. They're editing them at the same time. Continuity is really hard to follow when you watch this franchise. They could have done a much better job as a franchise on doing that, but they didn't know which one to release first. 2 was supposed to release first, and they just felt number 1 was the better movie. We focus on Colonel Braddock, played by Chuck Norris, who's like 8 or 9 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and he goes back to the camp where he was a prisoner at to rescue these POWs. It's awfully funny that this is very similar to Rambo 2, yet this was released a year earlier. I don't think anybody ripped each other off or anything. I think it's just a story that during that time, every, action person wanted to make an action movie was thinking of, you know what I mean? So I think it's just a coincidence, really. Obviously, Rambo 2 made the more money. Rambo 2 had Stallone and had the budget, but this is nothing wrong with this movie, man. This is a decent Chuck Norris movie that I really enjoyed. It has the action, man, some really good action. Where there's a nice dream sequence at the beginning of his time in Vietnam, and there's like a raft scene later on when he's going back into Vietnam, where he's mowing guys down in a raft with a gun and everything like that. I just absolutely love that. And Chuck Norris going in there, rescuing the POWs, bringing them right back to Saigon, right into the Vietnamese government building, and proving it and it just kind of ends there, and it's just like, you're just on board with his story, and you could tell it was that real personal story. And there's that iconic shot where Chuck Norris pops out of the water, and it's slow motion, and he's blasted people away. That's something, even though when I watched the movie the first time, I've seen that somewhere before. I must have watched this when I was a kid or something, just didn't remember it, because that's iconic. Coming at number 5 is Braddock, Missing in Action 3.
I don't step on toes, Little John. I I step on necks.
All right, as you can see, I'm a big fan of this franchise. I watched this one a lot when I was a kid. So rewatching it now, I haven't watched it in years. I thought, let's see how this holds up. And I still liked it. I thought it was just a really fast-paced, great action film, showing Chuck Norris with some vulnerability, showing more emotion. I think he has a chance to act a little bit more in this. It seems to me online and everything that this may be the worst one for a lot of people, but it wasn't for me. I really enjoyed this one. Enjoyed it as a kid. I enjoyed it now. Has one of the funniest one-liners ever where he goes, "I don't step on toes, little John. I step on necks." Just classic Chuck Norris. Continuity still doesn't make sense. Apparently, before he was captured as a prisoner of war, he had a wife and everything like that. She was presumed dead, and it turns out that their two bodies kind of got mixed up, and she's still in Vietnam. She had a child, Braddock's child, so he has a son who's like 12 years old now, and he hears this from a preacher or a priest of some kind who runs a school out there, and he goes in there to find his wife and his son. I think right there, you're just invested in the character. You're invested in the emotion of the character and everything like that. And it's all about him, rejoining with his wife and son. Now, they do something where the wife gets killed, and I really felt there was no reason for that. That was just set up for Chuck Norris to go on a rampage. I still think you could have had a really good action movie with her alive, and then them three all making it out. With everything this character has been through in this franchise, I think that would have been a really satisfying ending. Coming at number 4 is Missing in Action 2. Yes, now you know it. There you go. I liked Missing in Action 2. Again, I feel like people really felt like this was a kind of a boring movie for them. It doesn't go for the full-blown action. There's some action at the end. This movie's all about his time in Vietnam. Those 9 years, I guess, where he was a prisoner of war. And I think it gets really grimy and dirty, and it's a gritty film. I think you're seeing Chuck Norris act a bit. The continuity, again, there's a different villain in each movie, which doesn't make sense. Like the villain in this movie should have been the villain who had him originally as a prisoner of war in number 1. So that's kind of strange. It doesn't freaking make sense, but I like more of the drama in it, where this villain, this guy who runs this camp, is really trying to push Chuck Norris to admitting and writing down that, you're a criminal of war crimes against Vietnam, and he won't. And it's all about these two guys. The one guy's just pushing and one guy's resisting. And the things they put Chuck through, Russian roulette on his men and stuff. The guy hangs Chuck Norris upside down, puts a bag on him with a rat in it. And then you see him like struggling and everything. When they take the bag off, Chuck Norris like freaking killed the rat, like broke its neck with his mouth and everything. And it's like, that's a Chuck Norris joke right there, man. That's a Chuck Norris joke right there. But I mean, setting people on fire and all this kind of stuff. It's just, it's brutal. It's actually a really brutal movie. I really like the storyline of that. I like more the character study, the drama. You get an excellent fight scene between this Vietnamese general at the end and Chuck Norris. It's just, Chuck just kicks his ass, man. It's absolutely excellent. It's just what you like more. Do you want this full-blown action? I like more of the character drama that's going on and the tension that is building in this movie. And you get the action. Even though it's at the end and everything, you still get some pretty good action. So I really did dig this movie. Coming in at number 3 is Delta Force 2. You could say it's just nostalgia, but this is the one I watched again as a kid a lot. Delta Force 2 is the one I remember the most. I thought I think the villain in this is much better than the other Delta Force movie. I think he's absolutely sadistic. What he does, he's like this Colombian drug lord and everything. It's a more personal story. Now, Chuck Norris, Scott McCoy, is he's the colonel now. I think he's the colonel or the major. I can't remember. He's who Lee Marvin was in the first movie. And he's got a partner and everything who's become a friend and everything. It's a more personal story, more revenge story when they kill Chuck Norris's friend, his whole family and all that jazz. And there's this one scene where this drug lord films him poisoning his friend and seeing him die and everything. Then Chuck Norris goes to his unit and he just practices on all of them. This fight scene. This is how Chuck Norris lets off some steam. He beats up all his men. But there's some over-the-top stuff in this, like this, when he has to come into this drug lord's camp at the end, which is an awesome action sequence. You get awesome fight scenes at the end of this. When he captures the drug lord or when he kills him, you get another awesome fight scene. But it's when he's got to climb this mountain that's unclimbable. No mountain is unclimbable for Chuck Norris, and Chuck Norris climbs this freaking thing and everything like that. It's pretty hilarious. Just, I know, it's cheesy, over the top, but I always loved Delta Force 2, and maybe it's just a lot of nostalgia speaking. Coming at number 2 is Silent Rage. I love me some Silent Rage. I've been watching it ever since I was a young kid. This movie was released at a time where it was the golden age of slashers. Chuck Norris doing something a little bit different, a little bit experimental. A lot of people dub it as Chuck Norris versus Michael Myers, and you wouldn't be wrong about that. But it also has this great Frankenstein themes in there too, where they're these guys in the lab, where this John Kirby, the serial killer, who gets killed at the beginning, and they inject him with this stuff that makes him a super killer, bring him back to life, dealing with these, guys in this lab playing God and stuff. So there is something to say in this movie, which is good, especially, it's something you don't expect from a Chuck Norris film. It has the action, but mostly in one scene where Chuck Norris takes out all these bikers that have come into town and have taken over this bar. It's one of the greatest Chuck Norris fight scenes for sure. But the movie has also some pretty good kills and pretty good suspense. The opening of this film always terrified me, where this guy snaps. He takes an axe and goes up and starts killing everyone. He kills this woman where he's boarding from. Always terrified me because they never show it. You just hear the axe hit her and, your imagination's allowed to run wild. But Silent Rage is just one of those movies, it's labeled as Chuck Norris versus Michael Myers. And so you like Halloween, you like Chuck, you'll love this one. Coming at number 1 is Lone Wolf McQuade.
Would you do that to me, Texas Ranger?
I love Lone Wolf McQuade. This is the first Chuck Norris movie I ever saw. I mean, I just love the persona of this character, J.J. McQuade. He's the lone wolf. And this is stylized more like a Western, I find, and this is where he plays this Texas Ranger. And this, you could see where this led into Walker, Texas Ranger, real, popular TV show he did later on. And he's just a really hard-ass character in this. He lives alone. He's divorced. You see him have a pretty good relationship with his daughter. So he's not the ideal Texas Ranger that, the community wants to see, but he gets the job done. And that's kind of like the arc he goes on where, he's a real dirty, grimy kind of character, very blue collar, and he kind of cleans his act up kind of at the end of the movie. That's kind of like this arc he goes on to. And this is really the ideal Chuck Norris movie, the one I watch the most. The one that, I think has one of the best villains in any Chuck Norris movie, with David Carradine as this drug lord. There's this huge buildup of tension, and you throw a woman in there where they're both after, and that creates more tension.
Boys are just having a little fun.
You want to join the fun?
You see Chuck Norris kind of get his ass kicked through this movie, but you also see him kicking ass. There's some great chases and fight scene between David Carradine and Chuck Norris, and apparently these two did not like each other, and that shows on the camera, man. This end fight is one of the best fights I've seen in an action movie. I love this fight. I'll just go on YouTube and watch this fight all the time. I love it. It's got so much emotion with it, and that great score that's reminiscent of the old Sergio Leone movies, from like The Good, Bad, and the Ugly and stuff. It just has such a great score. Very, very powerful, the way they utilize it through this whole movie. You have such a good protagonist, you got to build up that antagonist, and they do that with David Carradine. They build this character up and build him up that you hate him, you despise him, you want to see Chuck kick his ass. that's what you gotta have to do, and that's why the movie holds up and why it works so well. And it's directed really well by Steve Carver, who did Eye for an Eye with Chuck Norris. So these two just really work obviously well together. And I love this movie. I love Lone Wolf McQuade from beginning to end, man. So that is it, guys. That is my top 10 Chuck Norris movies of all time. Let me know in the comments below yours, and we'll have a great discussion. And if you like this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, all that jazz. It really helps the channel out. Stick around for the end card because I have reviewed some Chuck Norris movies. I'll put them there so you can enjoy the channel, go down the rabbit hole, as I always say. And my name is Jason. You're watching Backtrack Cinema. I will see you next time, and I will see you in the movies. Cheers.